Governments around the world seem to have taken advantage of the ongoing pandemic to make major power grabs, some even explicitly using the coronavirus as a reason to consolidate authority. In Belarus, the longtime president, Alexander Lukashenko, often called Europe's last dictator, won his 6th consecutive term, claiming he'd got 80% of the vote. His opponent has been forced to flee the country after she called for a recount, citing widespread voter fraud. Mass protests have erupted and authorities have responded with violence, resulting in at least 2 deaths and thousands of arrests. The EU has stated that it does not recognize the election, but Belarus maintains close ties to Russia, and Vladimir Putin has offered assistance to Lukashenko in the wake of the unrest.
Trail of destruction from Pennsylvania to Massachusetts. Much of Philadelphia's Vine Street Expressway completely flooded, resembling a canal running through the city center. Here in New York, the bodies of at least 11 people were found in flooded basement apartments. A growing number of poor and working-class people, many of them immigrants, have been forced into illegal basement dwellings due to a shortage of affordable housing. Meanwhile, Mayor Bill de Blasio joined Governor Kathy Hochul and Senator Chuck Schumer Thursday in demanding Congress pass a federal infrastructure bill to help cities prepare for the climate catastrophe.
What we've got to recognize is the suddenness, the brutality of storms now. It is different. A record set 2 weeks ago, another record set now, rainfall like we haven't seen ever before. This is the biggest wake-up call we could possibly get.
Meanwhile, Hurricane Ida's death toll along the Gulf Coast has risen to 16. More than 830,000 customers remain without power. Louisiana officials say critical shortages of fuel are hampering relief efforts.
Authoritarian drift happens when a country's democratic foundations, such as free speech, fair elections, independent judiciary, and strong civil rights, are eroded. Here are a few examples from around the world to keep an eye on. In Hungary over the past decade, Prime Minister Viktor Orban's political party has quietly bought up most of the country's media companies, and in March took over the country's most widely read online newspaper. It was previously an independent check on the government, but a close ally of Orban recently purchased a controlling share in the company and in July fired its editor-in-chief, prompting dozens of reporters to quit in protest. Meanwhile, in Hong Kong, one of the country's most prominent entrepreneurs and newsmen, Jimmy Lau, was arrested along with his 2 sons and several of his company's executives. The charge? Suspicion of colluding with foreign forces, an offence which did not exist until a new national security law was forced upon Hong Kong by China in July. The outbreak of coronavirus in the Philippines has been one of the worst in Asia, and its president, Rodrigo Duterte, has used the lockdowns as an opportunity to pass a sweeping anti-terror law, greatly expanding the definition of terrorism, which rights groups worry could be applied to actions such as protests or criticism of the government. And in Brazil, as total deaths from COVID pass 100,000, the country's president, Jair Bolsonaro, has repeatedly clashed with the nation's Supreme Court, which has investigated him and his family. In May, Bolsonaro joined a rally against the Supreme Court, and he has claimed that he has the backing of the military to resist the court's absurd orders. Authoritarian drift has been a factor worldwide for years, but the pandemic seems to be accelerating it. Political scientists are questioning whether the handling of coronavirus could expose the weakness of democracy in comparison to the unchecked power of an authoritarian state.
National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, that's NOAA, published aerial photos showing miles of oil slicks along the Mississippi River and in the Gulf of Mexico, including spills near a Phillips 66 refinery and an Enterprise offshore drilling platform. Some 14 million people, or 1/3 of the population, face acute food insecurity, and half of all children under age 5 suffer from malnutrition. Western Union announced Thursday it's resuming money transfer services to Afghanistan. In the western city of Herat, dozens of women took to the streets Thursday to demand the Taliban respect their human rights and full participation in Afghan society.
We demand the right of education, employment, freedom, security, and also presence in public forums, social activities, politics. We have to take place in political, social, and public fields. We have fought for these important rights for years.
Meanwhile, intensifying fighting between rebel Afghan forces and the Taliban in Panjshir province, located north of Kabul, has reportedly resulted in casualties on both sides. This comes as the Taliban is poised to announce the formation of a new government in Kabul, with Reuters reporting recently returned Taliban co-founder Mullah Baradar will be its leader. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said the House will hold a vote this month on the Women's Health Protection Act, which could help protect abortion rights. But the legislation is unlikely to receive a 60-vote filibuster-proof majority in the evenly divided Senate. President Biden slammed the unconstitutional chaos unleashed by the Texas abortion ban, vowing to deploy a, quote, whole-of-government effort to respond to the attack on Roe v. Wade. Meanwhile, in Texas, abortion providers say they're having to turn away distraught patients, many of whom will now have to leave the state if they can afford it in order to access abortions. Gazans have been holding nightly demonstrations against the Israeli blockade and the ongoing violation of their human rights. And in El Salvador, hundreds of people took to the streets of the capital, San Salvador, earlier this week, protesting the adoption of Bitcoin as an official currency, making El Salvador the first nation in the world to do so. The law, spearheaded by President Nayib Bukele, takes effect next week. Critics warn of drastic fluctuations in cryptocurrency's value and say Bitcoin is often used for money laundering. Opponents also worry about the economic impacts on poorer communities, many of which don't have access to bank accounts or smartphones. This is a Salvadoran union leader.
The technology implemented for the use of this coin is still very expensive for Salvadorians, especially our older adults. It's high-end technology that's needed to handle this virtual currency.
Those who support democracy aren't taking this lying down. Young people in Hong Kong have been protesting for well over a year now and show no signs of stopping despite the pandemic. People from all over Belarusian society have risen up to demand an electoral recount, even in the face of violence from the police. In Brazil and the Philippines, the strong Supreme Courts have so far held up as checks on their country's leaders. For now, it seems that many democracies, both old and young, will have to prove that they can withstand a public health crisis while maintaining their democratic values, a challenge that may prove even more difficult if a dreaded second wave hits the world this fall or winter.